would also, this also strengthens and goes back to address some of the challenges to the 1965 Voting Rights Act that the Supreme Court has basically ruled either unconstitutional. And so you can see the bullet points there. And the biggest one, I think, is that last one, right, which would require categories changes to go through this notion of pre-clearance, which was basically making sure that the kind of voting rights that are being bandied about in places like Texas right now would have to actually be approved by the U.S. Department of the U.S. Justice Department's Division of Civil Rights. Both of those bills right now are kind of languishing in Congress. As you are all familiar, it takes both the House and the Senate to pass laws, and with a 50-50 split. And even though that the notion of the filibuster is nowhere to be seen in the Constitution, it is, of course, one of those things that has come down to be a tradition in the Senate. And so until something happens with that, it'll be curious to see how far we can go with that. Now, that's a brief look at Voting Rights Act. The other thing I think we have to look, go ahead, is a way out. And I think so. And this is where I think things obviously are near and dear to my heart. Okay. Next slide. And you might just have to kind of push this a little bit. So these were all headlines that came out in regards to what exactly is happening in regards to how we can actually improve civic education. And trust me, when and this is really interesting, right? Because all of these came out within the last year or so, these headlines, including Congress introducing something called the Civic Secures Democracy Act. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then, of course, here in Colorado, SB 21067 is the Senator Lowest Court Civics Act of 2021, which actually was cited today. No, yesterday. I was leading a conference, and we had a gentleman who was talking about voting rights and civics education, actually. And he stated specifically Colorado actually making strides in improving civic education within schools. Okay, our next slide, please. So basically, the Civic Security Democracy Act is a piece of legislation before Congress. It has bipartisan support, including from a number of former senators. Former Senator Orrin Hatch is actually a big supporter of this. We have to give props are due. And what this would do, if Congress passes it, would basically help fund civic education throughout the schools. Many years ago, Congress supported something called the Teaching American History Grants, which pumped literally hundreds of millions of dollars into teaching, into teaching and improving teaching American history in the schools. I went through a number of those programs, and it was probably some of the best professional development as a history teacher I ever received. And so now what we're trying to do is to put forth the same idea, this time a little bit more in terms of the civics world. So you can see some of the things that we're trying to do there. Okay. Again, here in Colorado, SB 2167 did a good job of helping to strengthen civic education. And again, this was a bipartisan bill that passed, and hopefully this will continue to improve the kind of education. By the way, Colorado actually has only one graduation requirement, and that is anyone who graduates from Colorado high school actually has to pass a course that addresses U.S. government and U.S. history. It's actually written into the state constitution as part of the original 1876 state constitution. Just a little more educational trivia. Okay, go ahead and go through. We would think that on the left, we see the notion that bipartisanship would work, and hopefully people have discussed that, and we saw that it does work. On the same, by the same token, on the right, Some of the things that we're beginning to address right now, obviously, is what has happened lately in things regarding something called critical race theory, which, as a social studies teacher, I can tell you most assuredly, one, those terms used together, critical race theory, are not part of the state standards when it comes to either history or civics or geography or economics or anywhere in the social studies standards, and nor in any other place in the country do we see that. Are teachers teaching about racism? Yep, absolutely. But again, that's for them. So a couple of last quotes that I'll leave you with. And these are two of my favorite quotes. And I'm going to go ahead and hit it, put both up side by side. The one on the right says, "An educated citizenry is a vital requisite for our survival as free people." And the one on the left is become one of my favorites. "Democracy is not something that you believe in or something you hang your hat on. It's something that you do, you participate in. Without participation, democracy crumbles and fails. If you participate, you win, and the future is yours." For those of you, the quote on the right, of course, is Thomas Jefferson. The quote on the left is Abbie Hoffman. Right? So I think we have one or two more slides to go through real quickly. So we'll save the questions and answer for the breakout rooms. I also want to do one quick little shameless plug, last slide. As Mike indicated, this year I am serving as the president of an organization called the National Council for Social Studies. It's an organization of nearly 10,000 social studies educators, ranging from pre-service, that is to say, people who are about to become teachers, PK through 12th grade, university students, as well as the university methods professors. And so it's an organization that is, we've actually got members in a number of countries as well. This year, we're hosting our annual conference in Minneapolis. We get to meet in person. Last year, we met like this, like everybody else did. And the theme that I chose, this is my theme, something I believe in and have believed in for some time, which is the notion of solidarity in social studies, because I think as an organization and as teachers together, we are stronger when we work together. So I see a quick question there. When the focus in school shifted to math and science, social studies took a backseat. That is true. I have a lovely slide that shows that social studies education has actually declined precipitously, starting in the elementary schools. Some of this goes all the way back to the last 20 years or so with the No Child Left Behind Act, where well-meaning legislators and administrators felt that students needed to learn how to read and write, but they didn't need to learn to read and write social studies, which is actually something they should have needed to read and write. So anyway, you got that. I don't know, Richard, whether or not HR 1 would have mandated that for Colorado. That would be kind of in the weeds a little bit, and you know, my function here is to kind of be the teacher, so I'll leave that to other people. So with that, that concludes the lesson. Again, I'll be kind of floating in and out of some of the rooms. If you have questions, feel free to contact me. You can, and I'll put, I'm gonna drop. I will, that email is my email through NCSS. You're more than welcome to email me there if you have questions, and I will do my best to point you in the right direction. So with that, I want to thank everybody for listening in, and hope this kind of sets the stage for the rest of our evening. And to that end, go ahead. I think we can go to our next couple of slides. What I'd like to do at this point is introduce the three individuals who are going to be working in our breakout rooms. I'm going to give a brief introduction to all three of them, and then my understanding is that we will kind of break everybody into some breakout rooms where each one of them will either have a presentation or lead a discussion, and Ultra or who's ever running the meeting will have instructions for us here in a little bit.
I made it, yeah. So we'll do quick
good.
intros
Hi,
with
Ultra.
each. Yay, I made it. Sorry, everyone. My computer decided a Windows update was necessary about 20 minutes before this started. So yeah, we'll do intros of each of the presenters, let them give a quick introduction of themselves and what they're either going to be talking about tonight or what organization they represent. Then we'll break you out into breakout rooms to have those sort of small group discussions. And then at the end, because we have one presenter here this evening who is at the All-Star game, that must be really tough, Owen, really tough. But we'll put that together, and then he's kind of put a group presentation together for a breakout session at the end. So we'll kind of do 2 breakout sessions, come back together to do the third one, and then have our open house discussions at the end of the night as well. So yeah, if you want to start with our first presenter, and then Stephanie can give her intro and we'll move on.
Sure. So I'd like to introduce Stephanie Vigil, who's the House District 16 chair. She is also a recent candidate for state office and has done a lot of volunteering and organizing in the community. Stephanie, would you like to say a couple words of introduction as well?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thanks for making it on tonight. I know there's a sport thing going on that you all sacrificed to be here. It wasn't for me, but it must be for some people. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the redistricting process, which, as we know, because of some recent amendments to our state constitution, we are doing by independent commission for U.S. congressional and state legislative seats. But there's also more coming down the pike for us in El Paso County. As Mike was talking about earlier, we did pass a new state law recently that modifies how county commissions redistrict themselves. And we do still, unfortunately, have fixed into our state constitutional law that county commissioners can draw their own boundaries for their own races. So we have fixed things a little bit in the right direction, but it's still something we're going to need a lot more engagement on, even than we have in the past. So I'm just going to talk a bit about what that looks like, how you get involved with that, what it means to identify a community of interest and actively encourage commissions to draw it for you and so on. So. Okay. Look forward to talking with all of you more.
Thanks, Stephanie. So I will also briefly introduce Owen Perkins, who, as we speak, is actually up in Denver, I believe at Coors Field, multitasking between the Democratic Party meeting and the All-Star game up there. I'm not going to go through his entire biography, but as you can see, Owen is alumni of Colorado College, did some teaching down at the Fountain Valley School, and has really been involved in a number of things, and in particular, the notion of the clean slate group that has been working to, along with a number of other things, helping to try to see if we can get the For the People Act passed in Congress. And I know, Owen, you're going to actually be presenting kind of a presentation you put together to the entire group towards the end, but you want to give us a quick preview? Yeah, maybe not. Oh.
On the
there we go.
Game there in Denver. It's great to have it happening in a place that is a...
Start that over. Sorry about that.
Greetings, Colorado. This is Congressman Sarbanes from Maryland. First of all, let me congratulate you on the All-Star Game there in Denver. It's great to have it happening in a place that is dedicated and committed to lifting up our democracy. So congratulations on that. Also want to thank you for the All-Star Voting Rights Rally, putting energy behind this effort of ours to get H.R. 1S1, the For the People Act, over the finish line, which we have to do in the coming weeks. It's high stakes. We need to make that happen, and you're joining the chorus on this and keeping the temperature high is absolutely going to make a difference. So thank you for that. As somebody who's been working on the For the People Act for many, many years, intensely over the last 2 or 3. Just thought I'd share a few thoughts about how it came together. And basically, this was written by you, by the American people. We listened carefully. Our North Star was to pay attention to the grievances and concerns that so many Americans have, regardless of their political stripe. The fact of the matter is, Democrats, independents, and Republicans all support the For the People Act by broad majorities. And the reason is there's nothing particularly controversial in there. It's all stuff that you've been asking for years. The voting part of the bill, much of which was written by the late, great John Lewis, is just designed to make sure that people can exercise their freedom to vote in terms of being able to register in a convenient way, have various options available to them to actually cast their vote, whether it's early vote or mail-in balloting or election day voting. So that's just about making it so you don't have to run this obstacle course every 2 years to get to the ballot box. It also pushes back, by the way, on this voter suppression effort that we've seen, this stampede of voter suppression across the country in the last 2 or 3 months. So it's very, very important. And it responds directly to concerns that we heard from you and from people across the country. The other thing we heard is that people really hate partisan gerrymandering, this idea that politicians choose their voters instead of the other way around. So a key part of the For the People Act is to address that and make sure we have fair standards in place when it comes to drawing these new districts, which we're doing now because of the census. So that's a very, very important piece. Other things we heard is that when lawmakers go to Washington, the public expects them to act in the public interest, not in their own self-interest, and not on behalf of any special interest. So we've got a whole set of ethical reforms in there, accountability, transparency, which is really, really important to restore confidence. Protecting against foreign actors hacking into our elections or getting on these digital platforms with misinformation is something that people are concerned about. So we put that into the bill to make sure that we can restore confidence there. And lastly, and this is really important, people are so fed up in America with corruption, with the role that big money plays and special interests in our politics, where they always seem to get their way. You know, Wall Street writes tax policy. The gun lobby determines what can happen when it comes to gun safety measures or lack thereof. Big Pharma leans in on prescription drug pricing and stops us from lowering that. And on climate change, the fossil fuel industry ends up calling the shots much of the time. That's because of the influence of money and lobbyists and super PACs in Washington. We need to push back against that. We absolutely do it in the For the People Act with disclosure and transparency of where that dark money is coming from, fixing the broken Federal Elections Commission so it can be a cop on the beat when those big money actors get out of line, and standing up a new system for funding campaigns in America at the federal level, which allows for the matching of small donations. So everyday Americans' voice is the one that matters, not the megaphone of the big money. And by the way, a system like that also brings a very diverse set of candidates into our politics, which is so important to represent communities across the country. So there it is. That's the essence of the For the People Act. It came from you. You wrote it. We put it together based on what we were hearing from people across the country. Now we got to get it over the finish line. That's the challenge in the coming weeks. If we have to change some rules in the United States Senate, then so be it. But we need the people to keep telling Washington that they want to make sure this happens. So your voice is critical. Please, again, as I said at the beginning, keep the temperature high. Ask others to join in this chorus. We can get it done. John Lewis always said to us, never give up and never give in. Well, we're not going to give in to voter suppression and big money, and we're not going to give up on our democracy. You've gotten us to this point. You're going to get us over the finish line. Thanks for all you do. Let's go win this fight.
All right. Well, and thank you. And then our last presenter who will actually be with us, and thank you for joining us, is former State Representative Terrance Carroll, who, in addition to being a former member of the Colorado House of Representatives, is the only African American to have served as Speaker of the Colorado House. He served in the state legislature from 2003 until he was term limited out in 2011. Terrance has been listed by 1580 magazine as one of the 50 most influential people in Denver, and noted that his reputation as a skillful deal maker. Stated he is a critical and respected negotiator. He serves currently as the executive director of Unite Colorado, and he serves as a reserve police officer with Colorado's Shared Law Enforcement Reserve. He's been listed as a power book industry leader in law by the Denver Business Journal. He's an alum of the Marshall Fellowship, Memorial Fellowship of the German Marshall Fund of the United States. He's a graduate of the University of Denver's Sturm College of Law, Morehouse College in Atlanta, and holds a Master of Divinity degree from Iliff School of Theology in Denver, and is a ordained Baptist minister. Reverend Carroll, I don't know if there's anything much more I could say other than thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the invitation. I want to thank John for that. And I also saw my friend Linda Templin is here as well from RCV for Colorado. Hi, Linda. I haven't seen you in a while, but good to know you're here. I'm just going to take a moment to talk about what we do at Unite America / Unite Colorado. We're really a good government and democracy reform organization, and in a lot of ways morphing towards voting rights in many ways, because our central core belief is that we had to put voters first for democracy to work. And we believe that our democracy has fundamentally become broken because of hyperpartisanship. And our goal is to change the way that elected officials and citizens interact with democracy. And we have 4 key reforms that we're focused on around the country. That is redistricting reform, so anti-gerrymandering, open primaries, ranked choice voting, and ballot access is one of those as well. And I'm missing one because it's actually a real 4th one, but I'm missing one. It's been a long day. So I look forward to talking with all of you in the breakout session about the work that we do. And I should add that we work closely with Ranked Choice Voting Colorado this last session and many other advocacy groups to pass ranked choice voting in nonpartisan municipal elections. And Unite Colorado also worked closely with people of color-led organizations to pass the multilingual ballot access bill. And we were part of the coalition that got past the anti-gerrymandering bill that was referenced earlier. And we took on the not so glorious task of trying to lobby Republicans to vote for the bill, which you can imagine was an uphill battle in many ways. So thanks for having me here. And I should apologize in advance. I won't be able to stay for the open house portion because of a previous engagement, but again, thank you.
Thank you. So just a quick note on what's going to happen with the breakout rooms. It's actually going to say, I think Ultra will invite you to a room. Because Chandra couldn't be here tonight, but if it invites you to a room, click join. We'll move everybody into the main room here. We'll stay as one room, and then we'll have a second room. One will be Terrance, one will be Stephanie as presenters. We're going to move the presenters. So once we get you all settled in, we'll start a timer. We usually set it for about 15 minutes or so. You'll have a timer in the corner of your screen as well, and I'll send out reminders when we get low on time. And then we'll switch out presenters. So you'll stay in your room as a group to have your discussions. And then at the end for our 3rd discussion, we will pull everybody back into the main room to watch the video that Owen provided for us to continue the discussion on his topic. You should have the option to join now. And if you don't, you'll stay in this main room. All right, I'm going to bump a couple people over. Okay. Terrance, if you want to take this room first.
Sure, will do.
And Brooklyn, just move it one slide forward and it should be a blank background. And then you can unshare. Perfect. And then unshare. Yay.
Oh, that worked.
Yeah. And if you're in the room, you can unmute, show your video, and have a conversation if you'd like.
Okay, that'll work. Since this is a dialogue and discussion, I'll just kind of leave the floor open to see what type of questions folks want to ask me. And we'll just, I don't think too much is off limits, although it won't be a Bill Clinton moment where we'll talk about boxers or briefs, but I'm certainly happy to talk about just about anything related to voting rights and democracy reform and good governance. You're on mute.
Hi, how many people are in this room? I can't see everybody.
There are 11 people in the room.
Okay, I need to mess with my stuff a little more and get everybody on. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for, hey, Linda. Jane, are you in charge of the timer as well?
I am.
So Terrance, could I ask a question? What's coming up in terms of challenges to voting rights in Colorado? I think we focus on obviously what's going on in Texas and some of the other states because it's such outrageous stuff. But do you see any concerns, at the state level here in Colorado, or maybe even at the local level, but specifically in the state?
I mean, there are no specific threats in Colorado, although there were attempts this last legislative session to run about somewhere around 8 or 9 voter suppression bills. But thanks to the composition of our General Assembly, those things were swatted down pretty quickly. There were some ballot measures that were going before the title board that could be classified as voter suppression bills, but they didn't make it past the title board. So for now, we're okay in Colorado, but I would say that we need to be vigilant. When I served in the legislature, even when we were in a majority, there were always attempts to do things related to make it harder for people to vote. And this last session, and some bills that I think that should have been pretty easy for everyone to get on board with, that would have expanded the franchise from my perspective and really put voters first. We saw a lot of opposition from Republicans in the General Assembly, things like ballot access, things like anti-gerrymandering for county commission seats, and with ranked choice voting. And I suspect that we'll continue to see that in the future. The other thing that we have to take note of, that the state party leadership of the Republicans has taken, a pretty hard turn right. You have an acolyte of Lauren Boebert, who is now the state party chair. It's not to say that all Republicans are bad, but I'm saying we should look at who the leadership is and what they're about, and they really are proponents of the big lie. And I wouldn't be surprised if in January, when the legislature reconvenes, that we'll see more attempts at voter suppression in January 2022.
Okay, ever vigilant then, I guess is the word here. Huh? And I think I agree with you. I think voting rights are nonpartisan or bipartisan, or at least they should be. But my experience over the last 8-10 years in Colorado is seeing a great improvement in access for all Colorado voters, mail ballots, early voting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And interestingly enough, those bills have all been passed when Democrats are in control of the House, Senate, and governorship. So I don't know if it's a coincidence or not. I think it's not. But I think it is something that, if any of those components shift, you're going to see some of those bills that you referenced that essentially this year in Colorado got absolutely nowhere. They were swatted down real quick, but they'll have more legs. So I think we always got to be on the lookout.
Yeah, we have no better example than our neighbor to the south in terms of Arizona. They had an excellent opportunity to, I'm gonna call it, to elect a pro-voter General Assembly down in Arizona, and just by a few seats they lost. And now we've seen what's happened in Arizona with a slate of voter suppression bills that passed. Unite America was involved in killing about 18 of the voter suppression bills in Arizona, but there were enough that got by that it's run up to the Supreme Court already, and the Supreme Court's pretty much given the green light to future voter suppression efforts around the country. And it's not just states like Arizona, but we have the typical states in the South. Georgia, for instance, you can't give out water at a polling place. I mean, you talk about something ridiculous, that's ridiculous. And then when you also look beyond Georgia and places like that, we've seen the same thing in northern states, Ohio, Indiana. You just go across the board. I think the Brennan Center said there was something like more than 300 anti-voter bills in 2021. We'll continue to see that. Colorado, we had a good run of the past 10, 15 years in Colorado, we've had a good run of passing pro-voter initiatives either on the ballot or in the General Assembly between the Independent Redistricting Commission, all-mail ballot elections. You just go right down the pike. We've had a good run at it, but all that can be turned around except for the stuff that's in the Constitution if we're not vigilant about the people that we elect to office in the state. And I think this year we made another step forward, and I'm certain Linda would agree with me, with the passage of ranked choice voting for nonpartisan municipal elections. And one of the reasons that Unite is really high on the hog, so to speak, about ranked choice voting is that we no longer have to worry about someone getting elected to office of just 32% of the vote or in a crowded field, but we actually get voters to express their preferences, and we'll get a majoritarian result. So you have to have 50% plus one to be elected in office. And I'll tell you where this, the most vivid example of this was in Colorado, not Colorado Springs, but in Aurora, Colorado, and former Congressman Mike Kaufman was elected mayor of Aurora. It was a crowded field. He was the first to the post, so to speak, and he only had 32% of the vote, which means that there were a whole lot of people who didn't want him to be mayor. If we had ranked choice voting where voters could express their preferences, it's likely that he wouldn't have been mayor. And if you are a reader of the New York Times, Maya Wiley, who lost her bid in the Democratic primary in New York just recently to become the Democratic nominee, rather progressive, staunchly progressive person, very woke, who is endorsed by AOC, she came out and said, hey, I may not have liked the results, but ranked choice voting worked, and it worked for people of color, and it worked for women. And from my perspective, when we in a city that is diverse as New York, to only have one person of color ever elected mayor in its history, and now we'll probably have a second, I don't think that would have been possible in most places without ranked choice voting, because we avoided vote splitting. You could clearly, express your preferences 1, 2, and 3, and it avoided some costly runoffs. So that's our big focus right now in Colorado. Although there's not much left we can do to the legislature. So one of my big jobs going forward in the near future is looking at what else can we do in Colorado to push us forward, to really expand ballot access, to really put voters first. And we're going to be putting a lot of intellectual energy into trying to figure that out. Linda says there's breaking RCV news. The city of Broomfield unanimously referred RCV to the November ballot this evening. So that means that they're likely to become the second home rule city in the state of Colorado to adopt ranked choice voting, and they're following the city of Boulder. There are 2 other cities that have ranked choice voting in the state. That's Telluride and Basalt. Do we count the third one still, Linda?
Well,
Carbondale?
Carbondale technically has it. They haven't used it yet because they haven't had 3 people running for office yet in, a dozen years. So
Yeah, they struggle to
technically
get
they're-
people to run for office in Carbondale, so I think I might move there and restart my political career. No, just joking.
it is pretty. I'll give them that.
Would you like to add something about RCV, Linda?
Oh, goodness. Yeah, I just was excited to see the El Paso County Democrats looking at this. And this is an item that may be coming up in a study session with the Colorado Springs City Council. So anyway, so that is a real possibility in the Springs, because it would save the city $500,000 on those runoffs they have for the mayoral seat, and it better serves overseas voters, and it optimizes mail ballots. So if somebody drops out or something happens, those votes have someplace to go. So you don't have a repeat of what Terrance pointed out very nicely in the Denver Post. 150,000 voters here in Colorado had their votes not counted when Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg dropped out after they'd already mailed their ballots. So yeah, so it's a real possibility in El Paso County.
Does anyone else have any questions about the work that we do at Unite and where we see things going in terms of both nationally and or locally?
Hi, Anton, and I'll just jump in here. So from my perspective as an educator, one of the things I've been fortunate to do is to have the opportunity to teach about other countries. And in Canada, all the voting in Canada is actually done through something called Vote Canada, which is it's a nationwide organization. Every single ballot in Canada looks exactly the same. All of the they call them ridings, not districts, but all of the ridings up there are drawn in a nonpartisan fashion. They really have some voting laws that make sense. And again, they've got a fairly high voter participation rate. Sorry, I'm not sure about ranked choice voting up there at this point. I'm sure there's probably some cities that do that, but I think it's just a great model for others to kind of compare and take a look at other countries that do stuff like this, and it actually works. It works well.
Linda says London, Ontario, Canada has RCV.
There you go.
Now, one of the things that we saw in New York City was they had record-breaking turnout and participation in this last mayoral election. Some people had argued that ranked choice voting was too confusing for people and therefore they wouldn't vote. But the other issue that we pay a lot of attention to is redistricting. And I had to fly to Richmond last year to talk about this a little bit, Virginia, to their General Assembly that's controlled by the Democrats, who had campaigned on redistricting reform, but when push came to shove, they tried to run away from it. And that's one thing, as a proud Democrat, even though I work for a nonpartisan organization, I pray that the Democrats hold true to their convictions when it comes to redistricting and not in places around the country try to run away from independent redistricting or anti-gerrymandering, because it was bad for Republicans to do it. And as someone who has a lot of family in the South, it disenfranchised a lot of African Americans. It shouldn't be done when we're in control. That's just my perspective on that. Is there a feel for how the current Colorado Springs City Council feels about RCV? I think Linda's had more contact with them, so I'll ask her, because RCV handles a lot of the municipal work, and her cat showed up to talk about it as well.
Luna loves Zoom. Okay, so yeah, so we've had conversations with council, and they are leaning positive. We're making sure they get some messengers at their presentations from people of similar viewpoints, because we know that of communicating ranked choice voting is it's best if you learn about it and discuss it with people like yourselves. So I'm not the best messenger, but there will be, let's see, Stand Up Republic, as well as the Independence Institute will be presenting on ranked choice. And they have Wayne Williams right there. And, you know, when Telluride said, hey, these are all the things we're doing for ranked choice, this is what we find is working, you need at the Secretary of State's office to get ready for this. Under Wayne Williams, they started a lot of the work that this session's new law continues. So they've got a subject matter expert right there.
Anyone else have any questions? It looks like we've been told we have only like a minute or two left, or 3 minutes. I don't know. I'm a Baptist preacher. I'm used to going
We're
beyond
about
time
90
limits.
seconds left right now.
See, my Baptist preacher in me would just ignore that, but since I'm not controlling the clock, I can't just waltz right through it like it didn't exist. And so I'm just going to give you a quick tutorial on going to Black church. Black preachers do 3 closings. So when you hear us say we're going to close the first time, don't believe it. The second close is to wake you up in case you're asleep. And the third one is when we really nail it home and then we close. And they told me it's time to wrap up. Last 90 seconds. Thank you, Ultra. I will close up, but please feel free to contact me. You can find more out about us at either unitecolorado.org or uniteamerica.org. And I'm happy to chat with anybody about the work that we're doing and how important it is and why we should put voters first as opposed to, and why it's important for our democracy that voters be put first. I call the work that I'm doing now, some of the other work I'm doing now revolves around diversity and democracy, DEI and democracy, and I call it democratizing democracy so that it works for everyone.
All right, give me just a second to swap presenters.
I'm in here. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. And I believe, Terrance, I think you were supposed to get kicked over to the next room, huh?
I'm just going wherever I'm kicked to.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay, so I just, because I'm doing this 3 times, I feel like the last one is going to be like so much more succinct and like on point.
Oh, there's, I got the invitation to leave.
But I still, oh, okay. I was, I think I took a little bit more time with my presentation portion of my first one than I wanted to. So if I skip over a few things, it's because I'm trying to budget for time and make sure we allow space for some discussion. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Cool. So yeah, like Mike talked about, I've been pretty involved with redistricting rules and procedures kind of over this last year. We did pass a bill at the state legislature this last session to kind of take some of the logic of amendments Y and Z and apply them to county commissions that elect by district rather than all at large. Specifically because of this kind of thing. This is not the greatest illustration because it kind of implies that red and blue voters are equally distributed by like population density, which is not the case in real life, and which of course is exactly why it's so much easier for Republicans to gerrymander the districts that they want, just because Democrats necessarily live in more urban areas because of that urban-rural divide. And when people already live close together, it's so much easier to splinter them and put them into different little districts and fan out their voting potential that way. So that kind of leaves us with some unfortunate facts in the way that we elect people at all levels of government. That PVI stands for Partisan Voting Index, which is basically just how partisan a district is in one direction or the other. So for instance, you know, like our congressional district is an R14, or at least it was the last time this was calculated, which is a pretty strong Republican lean. And this kind of this level of data that's available to political actors, and I am one, we know where we're likely to win and where we're not likely to win. And so it kind of just boils this whole competition down to a predictability game. And we end up with something like 90% of US House seats not even being truly competitive, and no more than about 40 who meaningfully have a chance of losing their seat, even if a great number of people across the country are very unhappy with them, their party, and their whole platform. So we're just kind of getting to have a breakdown in that healthy tension between our electeds and the voting public, because we should always be able to vote out someone who is not doing what we want them to do. And, you know, like Mike was saying earlier, we don't practically have that opportunity in El Paso County, where it's so heavily gerrymandered that it's 100% Republican, basically no matter how the rest of us vote. So this is just kind of a breakdown of the levels. Like I said, the federal and state, we know we've got the independent commission. County, we have some new rules in place. Will probably still be done by our board of commissioners. And for municipal districts, it just kind of depends on where you live. In Colorado Springs, we have it mostly done by city staff, but we do have a volunteer commission that approves it. So I want to say that, like, by the time this is all done, I think we'll be really happy with our multi-partisan board, that 4-4-4 balance, maximum citizen input. I think if it weren't for former guy tampering with the census, we would be on track right now. As it happens, I'm about to share a bunch of dates with you that are actually not entirely up to date. We just put a bunch of this together. I got some great help from Katie Shukas, who's been doing a lot of this. And then there's a press release out that the Congressional Commission intends to appeal to the Colorado State Supreme Court to have their deadline extended, to cancel some dates. Like it's kind of up in the air again. So in the meantime, we are looking at several things when we make a fair map. Their number one imperative is to roughly distribute population equally across districts. The next is compactness, complying with the Voting Rights Act, right? Like we don't, like not intentionally splitting a community of color, for instance, and then competitiveness when all other considerations are equal. So the compactness is actually a very objective measurement. This is just one way of doing it. There are a number of ratios. I kind of like to cite this one because it makes the most sense to me. And if you ever want to impress anyone at a cocktail party or a barbecue or what have you, you can tell them about the Polsby-Popper ratio, which is what this is. It basically just measures the perimeter of a shape of a district against the circumference of a circle that has the same area. So for instance, like A would not fit in that circle at all. B is a little bit better. C is very compact. That's actually a continuous area, which is what we want to go for, because the more you're splitting up spaces like this, you know, the more you can safely bet that you are, we know how you vote. It's all very predictable. And so taking it away from politicians will get some of these shapes to be a little bit more sane. The big thing that we need citizen input in, though, when it comes to this process, is to preserve communities of interest, to ensure that your community is being represented, like say by one congressional representative, if in fact you have specific needs that would relate to federal law, so that you aren't like trying to figure out which town hall to go to when there's forest fire coming into your city, for instance. So this is one example my mind always goes to immediately, maybe because I managed a certain county commission race that was not successful in District 3, partly because of these shenanigans. So we have here like Western Monument and Palmer Lake, and kind of this goofy line drawn here. That's the Air Force Academy, which, for reference, that means that this little space has been drawn into this district that is otherwise pretty likely to start leaning towards a Democratic candidate, but because they draw their own boundaries, because they're able to slice and dice and move things around based on the people who they want to have voting for them, we end up with a map like this, with a heavily diluted urban center and meticulously drawn lines that ensure 5 Republican districts. So this, we have a couple of years before we can do too much about. This is our county commission map. But in the meantime, we are able to look at the level of competitiveness that we have in El Paso County for our state representatives and senators, and also to ensure that we're in a congressional district that's potentially flippable. This is the lack of competitiveness that we have at the county level here. We have about 25% representation in our state legislative delegation, 0 Democrats on county commission. And this is in a county where we're voting 40% or more Democratic in an average election. So, I do want to save a little bit of time to see where people are on being able to publicly comment. Like I said, I'm going to show some dates and locations and things to you, and they're not necessarily going to be up to date by the time, basically by the time that appeal is complete, because it looks like they're going to be buying themselves some time. Move forward. This is the timeline that we're on roughly. We are a little ways into the public hearings that started on July 9th. But that 32 public hearings could go down to, I think, like 21 if they have their way. And we're looking at maybe having a delayed submission to the courts if they are able to get the court to do that. So that's up in the air as of this afternoon. So I apologize that it's not terribly current. With all of these public hearings, you do not have to do one that is in your area. You can absolutely participate in more than one, including those that are technically located outside of where you live. And you should really be taking this opportunity to advocate for what your community of interest is, whether that's, keeping your municipal area in one district, ensuring that, specific areas are not being split to dilute your vote if you live in the city, and so on. Again, really great hearing dates. Hopefully they will actually happen. I'm kind of fingers crossed for that. Just kind of like a fire hose of information here that unfortunately some of it might not end up being pertinent to you. But I would really like to have everyone consider testifying at an early event, not waiting for the Woodland Park and Colorado Springs events that'll be closer to home here. First of all, we don't know that the dates won't be changed. And you're able to comment at more than one, and they have to hear all of the comments, even if you give them at more than one meeting. And you can guarantee that people who are not interested in a fair map will comment more than once. And it'll just give us an opportunity to provide more input at more points along the way. I'm going to drop these in the chat when I close this out. There's some trainings that you can get on Monday evening with All on the Line, which is just, they're entirely taken up with the redistricting process. And also some of these preliminary maps you can look at and kind of see where you're going to be and if it makes sense to you. And if it doesn't make sense to you, you'll have a jumping off point to voice your concern. So kind of as we're going through this whole process, we want to be thinking ahead a couple of years. They have a deadline set September 30th, 2023, when our county commission will need to submit any redraw, and they will absolutely try to redraw. They will definitely do it themselves. They're going to find every way that they can to not follow the new rules. And we need to be a step ahead of them when that comes. So I will go ahead and close that for now. And I really hope that I was quick enough that we have time for some discussion. 5 minutes. So does anyone have like questions, ideas, things that I left out? They're all so lively. You must be watching the game in the background.
Stephanie, did you say people can testify more than once? Like people can go and
Yeah.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, you know, at the same time, we want to make sure that there's ample time. And if you, you know, can't make it to the one that's for Colorado Springs and you want to try for, I think they have one in Buena Vista, you should do that. It might even be a good time for you to show up and say, hey, actually, I don't think that, you know, that we should share a congressional district with El Paso County, you know, El Paso County and Buena Vista, if that's what you think. Or basically whatever case you want to make. For how your district should or should not be shaped, which is not, again, it's so subjective. It's not really something anybody can tell you.
Yeah.
How you want, what you want to promote. That training will help, I think, quite a bit. And I'm going to go ahead and drop that in the
Okay. Take a look at that
in the chat for everyone. Yeah, I'd also recommend everyone just sign up for the email list. There's like a big yellow button on the redistricting website, and they will keep you up to speed on everything that they're doing. Any press releases, changes to dates, and such like will all be there. So I always feel like I put way too much information in there. Go ahead, Mike.
What's your take on the initial recommendations for this? I'm not talking congressional, but the state legislative lines. And one concern, and I was looking at it. Looks to me like, being a West Sider, Manitou, Old Colorado City, and some of downtown Colorado College is going to be in a district. It's a House district, I believe, that extends all the way to the north. Western border of the county, including Palmer Lake Monument.
Yeah, and it's the same kind of split that's happened with county commission, where I think they're kind of trying to like balance out and it ends up splitting up the Tri-Lakes area. So yeah, I would argue against that. I don't want the Tri-Lakes area split in two to ensure that there's enough Republicans on both sides of that line. I don't think it's great for, well, currently Mark Snyder, but whoever else wants to represent the West Side, because it changes HD 18 so much. The new district that would be created, that's like the central part of Colorado Springs, for my own purposes, I love it. If I move into it, I win. I basically just need to cross the line and try at all. It's such a heavily Democratic district. But I kind of want that actually to tone down a little bit and allow a little bit more available Democratic base to the other couple of districts, because we really should be sending upwards of 3 Democrats to our state legislature based on how we vote.
So I was wondering what your take was. You know, instead, I mean, we have 2 now. Would this new recommendation? I mean, to me, if I'm Mark Snyder, I'm really worried by that. That recommendation.
Yeah.
Does
well,
that mean
as is. Yeah.
We net lose Democratic seats in El Paso County. So go from 2 to 1, maybe.
No, I don't think so. I think if they were to do it as is, we would probably go to 2, with one of them being a slightly more, you know, kind of a little bit more of a swing district like HD 17 has been, but oddly placed because it would contain like West Side, Manitou, and downtown Colorado Springs. So it's not the final map, thankfully. I think what needs to happen is that northern border needs to come down. They need to not mess around with this like U-shaped district they have that's taking like the western and eastern parts of the county. And they definitely need to like bring up the southern border of the new HD 45. But that's like a lot of weeds to get into. So somebody wanted to talk about CD5. Hang around after. I think we should talk more in the after party group, or whatever we're calling it, because there's a lot more we could do there. So she said 90 seconds left. Man, I made my presentation too long. I knew I should have timed it a couple more times. Did not allow enough discussion time, I'm afraid. So, anybody have anything else? I don't think I've been prompted to leave yet.
We've got about 30 seconds until the other room closes completely.
Oh.
And
Okay.
if you want to pull up the next portion of the presentation. Again, darn, he's at the All-Star game. Going to give us a wish you were here video. And then at the end of it, we'll do what we call open house, where we stop recording and just sort of, if you were hanging out in person after the meeting and wanting to chat with folks, then we kind of continue the conversation that way.
Hi, this is Owen Perkins with Clean Slate Now Action. We're a advocacy group that works at the local, state, and federal level. We're based in Colorado, and we focus on getting the corrupting influence of big money out of politics and campaign finance reform. So I'm happy to be able to join you virtually today. I am, unfortunately, my day job is I'm a baseball writer, and I'm up covering the All-Star game as we speak. So rather than compete with 50,000 fanatics to be heard over the Zoom, I'm giving you a pre-recorded presentation. But I do have some long roots in Colorado Springs. I am a graduate of Colorado College. I taught at Fountain Valley School, and I was most recently an editor and writer at the Colorado Springs Independent. So love the community, love living there, and I'm happy to be with you tonight to talk about campaign finance reform for the city. So let's get right into it. You do see our website there in case you want to connect, my phone number, and we'll put this up, and email, put this up at the end also. But I want to just get into why campaign finance matters for Colorado Springs. You know, there's a real distrust of government going on, and a belief that big money is breeding corruption in our campaign system and in our elections. We've got a system slanted toward protecting and often hiding big money and drowning out speech of everyday Colorado Springs voters and residents. This results in a council that hasn't always historically reflected the population, and it's some disengagement. When you've got that corruption, you get disengagement. We want to get citizens re-engaged again, and claiming ownership of their elections again, getting citizens-owned elections again. You know, when they see that corruption and feel like big money is running everything, most of us feel like we can't make a difference. There was a study a few years ago by the George Bush Institute, the University of Pennsylvania Biden Center, and Freedom House, which found that 8 in 10 Americans are concerned about the condition of democracy in our country. 68% believe democracy is getting weaker, and the biggest reason they identify for that is big money in politics. We've gotten to a point where people are questioning, you know, is it really one citizen, one vote, the way this country was founded, or are we evolving into $1, one vote? That's not what we've ever been about. But the University of Princeton says, you know, we're not always what we think we are, and they did a study to see whether the government is accurately reflecting the will of the people, and they came up with this chart, which is pretty basic and common sense, and the idea that if 80% of the people, you know, or whatever percent of the people believe in a certain idea, it ought to have that correlating percent chance of passing. So 80% of people believe in a policy issue, and if the bill reflecting that, it should have an 80% chance of passing. In fact, what they found out was that every bill in Congress has a 30% chance of passing, regardless of the support. 0 support, 30% support, 60% support, 100% support. It's going to have a 30% chance of passing. The only thing that makes a difference is engaging the wealthiest part of the population, and that includes corporations and special interests. And when they weigh in, start trying to influence, make their voice heard, They are heard. You see that yellow area there is what represents the voice of that top 10%. And when they are behind an issue, the chances of it passing doubles to 61% on the average. And that leads University of Princeton to believe that money is playing an outsized role in politics, and we actually have a system where corruption is legal in America. It's easy to understand why special interests want to be involved. They get a 22,000% return on investment when they back something. They get tax breaks, they get exemptions, they get kickbacks, all kinds of perks for being big donors to their elected officials. And what we get as a result is a legislative body that doesn't reflect us, doesn't reflect the population, the demographics of the population as a whole. We're seeing policies reflecting now the views of white, male, and rich. Now and probably always have been reflecting that demographic. Donors who give $5,000 or more to campaigns, 94% of them are white. Elected officials, 90% are white. This is not a coincidence. And you can see this in Colorado Springs. 9 out of 10 of your city council members and mayor are white. 10 out of 10 are over 58. 8 out of 10 are males. I'm sorry, 58 or over, but not to cut anybody off of the year, but 8 of 10 are males. So this is playing true very well in Colorado Springs. I never believed these figures, but it shows up, and they don't reflect the population. This is a few years old, these statistics, but they also show up with candidates. Not only are we electing candidates who meet a certain demographic, but we're only running candidates who meet a certain demographic. And that's because of the necessity of wealth or access to wealth to enter that realm of politics. Now, if money is speech, as the Supreme Court has declared, how do people of modest means speak in this country? Dozens of cities, counties, and states around the country have found an answer and made recent major reforms that are having tremendous success in restoring power to the people and protecting our democracy from becoming an oligarchy. These are dozens of groups that have done it over the last year at every level in the country. We're doing it in Colorado. 4 of the 5 biggest cities in Colorado have passed or are working on reforms over the last 4 years. Started with Denver and the Democracy for the People initiative, which bans corporations from donating directly to municipal campaigns as they're currently banned at the state and federal level. It lowered campaign contribution limits from a relatively high limit to be on the level of the significantly lower state level campaign. They created, this is the big piece of the pie, a publicly financed campaign system, 9-to-1 match. So your $10 contribution becomes a $100 contribution. Your $50 contribution becomes a $500 contribution. This only applies to contributions of $50 and under, and it's for candidates who opt not to accept special interest money in their campaigns and meet other criteria of qualifying. It also requires the disclosure of dark money, which is huge, and gets the spotlight on who is trying to buy these elections. So that's the first. The second, well, here they are, a close look at the effect. This is looking at a race before this went into effect, but you can see on that top line, there was a 2-to-1 advantage that candidate B held over candidate A, just based on the money they raised. When you put in the new limits and take out corporations, it became pretty close to even money on that second line, much closer at any rate, and really getting to even money if they all opted in for small dollar for the public financing. And when you add in the public financing on that bottom line, you end up actually with more money and an even, an equally footed race. You're playing on a level playing field. So a tremendous difference maker, this reform in Denver. Lakewood was next in 2019. They lowered their contribution limits significantly, again, to align with the state levels. They banned corporations and labor unions from contributing. When we say corporations, that always includes labor unions, anything that's corporation. They ban anonymous contributions. They require disclaimers to show who's paying for electioneering. I'm just hitting some of the highlights of their comprehensive reforms. And they added fines to up to double the amount contributed. So it used to be if you had a $5,000 contribution that was illegal, you might get a $50 fine. Now and that's the cost of doing business, no big deal. Now a $5,000 illegal contribution can run you a $10,000 fine. That's not good business, but it's good reform. So it gives real teeth to the city clerk to enforce these. Aurora came next in 2020 last year. They hit some of the same things, but very big reforms there. They put in limits on campaign contributions like Colorado Springs. They did not have contribution limits. Now they do. They prohibited corporations from contributing. They put restrictions on coordination between campaigns and dark money groups, the use of campaign funds. They created small dollar funds, small donor committees to empower those who are giving $50 a year and enable a group that is collecting $50 per individual per year to contribute to a campaign. And these kind of limits, these are overwhelmingly popular across the country and across party lines. These campaign finance, campaign contribution limits. 71% of Republicans want it, 83% of Democrats want it, 76% of independents want it. It's only elected officials who are out of the norm on this. They also added transparency and disclosure, more campaign finance reports, more details, more accuracy, stronger, more comprehensive reporting requirements for dark money groups, new disclaimer requirements to bring the political advertising into the light, and additional disclosure reports on a regular basis with more detailed information. And again, they got stronger oversight, just as Lakewood had, with real teeth in the enforcement process. And the way this played out in the most recent Aurora races, again, you see a candidate A and B with a 2-to-1 advantage nearly for candidate B. When you put in just the campaign finance limit and take out corporate donations, you get a reversal. Not a total reversal, but the advantage shifts to the candidate who's focusing on small dollar donors, on the constituents, on the community. Had Aurora used the campaign finance model, the public financing model, you'd have a total reversal of nearly that 2-to-1 advantage going to the first candidate, who was that grassroots organization. Fort Collins is currently considering reforms that would give a dollar-for-dollar public match for up to 50% of their proposed expenditure limit. So candidates have to have an opponent on the ballot. They have to raise 10% of the expenditure from contributions of no more than $25 each to qualify. They can only accept those contributions, qualifying contributions, from natural persons, and those people have to be from Fort Collins, from the city of Fort Collins. Once they've reached eligibility, then they get an expenditure limit. It's $25,000 for mayoral candidates, which is in keeping with what has been spent traditionally there, went a little higher in this last election, and $15,000 for council candidates, again, only from natural persons. They can contribute up to 10% of their own money to their campaign, and they have to return any unexpended campaign funds to the city and agree to participate in one public forum. A lot of these options can only happen as options. If you're opting into this, it's not a requirement, but if you choose to opt in, then you would be limiting your own contributions to your own campaign, for example. The cost would be $80,000 for the most recent, for the past election. The 2021 election that they had on the same day as your election, it would have been $82,500. So Denver's, that's per year. Denver's is $2 million per year, and that's 1/10 of 1% of Denver's annual budget. So a very small price to pay for clean and fair elections. This is a snapshot of our website and a look at Colorado Springs reporting. We have reports on all the communities we're involved in up there, and we show where the money's coming from, how it breaks down, in-state, individual contributions, special interest contributions. As you scroll down, you start to see the groups that are contributing to a given candidate, and see who's trying to influence the vote in Colorado Springs. I encourage you to go to cleanslatenowAction.org to dive deeper into this. In Colorado Springs, in the most recent election, this is one of the races. You can see candidate B had a slight edge, pretty close. Candidate D was way out of it, but their funding was entirely from corporations, save $38 that came from the candidate themselves. When you take away the corporate donations and put in the limits, you get these new numbers. Again, you're taking half the money out of the equation right now, and your candidate C is coming out slightly ahead in this case, instead of a little bit of a reversal here. So it shakes things up, but it also definitely puts things on equal footing to a large extent. I want to finish up with a quick look at 3 long-term cities and states that have been doing this for a long time and have great models to look at. On the matching funds front, New York has been doing this for decades. And this is a map of New York City showing the density of donors to campaigns. The top map shows donors to state campaigns. The bottom map shows candidates, donors to city campaigns. And the difference between state and city is the city has public financing. So when you add public financing, you get all those darker shades on the map in this example citywide, because we would think that's partly a result of knowing that their $10 now becomes $100. Their voice is amplified. They're able to be heard the same way big money is able to be heard. So when they feel like their contribution matters, they do get engaged. They do contribute, and you see that incredible shift in density with the same population. Just the difference being whether there's matching funds at the state level, which there were not at the time of this map, or the city level, which there were. And this is just zooming in on a certain neighborhood, the Bed-Stuy neighborhood. Again, incredible shift in the engagement at the donor level of just small dollar donations, any amount, but public financing brings that out to people. Seattle has what may be the gold standard. They do a voucher system, which they call democracy dollars, and they give 4 $25 vouchers to every registered voter. They can give those to candidates, and it's real campaign money. They can give it all to one candidate. They can give it to 4 different candidates, any combination, as long as those candidates have opted in for the public financing and meet the criteria. It gives voice to citizens of modest means. It's been incredibly popular, record-breaking fundraising, a great way of putting disposable cash that can only be used for campaigns into the hands of every voter, many of whom wouldn't have that option otherwise. And so it's empowering populations that have been left in the shadows. Groups like people on fixed incomes, people working minimum wage jobs, people without homes. These people have been ignored in the past, but now candidates have to pay attention to them, have to go and listen to them, and hopefully come away with their support and their donations. And finally, clean elections. This is where you qualify, and then you get basically a grant that covers your whole campaign expenses, and you're done. You're done raising money once you qualify, and you focus on getting your ideas out there. Connecticut is the best example for this. And I often talk about Connecticut, remembering Newtown and the elementary school shooting there. And we ask, what has happened since then on gun safety? And the answer is always nothing. But that's true at the federal level, but at the state level, Connecticut, which has a citizen-owned election where it's public financed and the legislature is not bought by special interest groups and big money, they voted for the most comprehensive gun safety regulations in the country as a result of that school shooting. They also passed things like paid sick days, raising the minimum wage, and state tuition for undocumented students. This is the kind of thing you get when you get citizen-owned elections again. And when you're incentivizing candidates by telling them, that if they can go ignore the deep pockets, the PACs, the insiders, and go to your district, spend time in your community, talk and listen to your constituents, you can come away with even greater resources by going to the people to power the campaign. How can they not choose to go into the district and take that option if you give it to them? The result is incredible. You get voter turnout increasing. People feel like they matter and they're playing a role in determining the outcomes. Communities of color get more engaged. Lower income communities can finally come out of the bleachers and onto the playing field. Wealth and access to wealth are taken out of the equation. And you get these more diverse candidates running and getting elected, including more women, more young people, and more people of color. You can get involved. You can go to the cleanslatenowAction.org website to keep up with what we're doing. We're planning a forum in Colorado Springs to take a deeper dive So sign up as a volunteer in these early stages of planning in the springs, and attend a planning session that we're going to have hopefully in the next month. We'll announce that shortly. Build a movement, invite a spokesperson to come and educate your group, talk about this, listen to your concerns. As people become more aware of what's going on, they become more engaged. It matters. They want to know. They vote based on that knowledge. Make your voice heard. Talk to your city council members, community meetings, city council meetings. Urge them to support meaningful campaign finance reform. And if you can also do this on the federal level with For the People Act right now. Call your senators, urge them to fix the filibuster and pass the For the People Act. Write letters to the editor. And if your council won't listen to you and won't act, take your initiative, launch a citizens initiative, put it on the ballot. There's overwhelming public support. If council won't act, the people will. So here's the contact information again. Want to thank you and let you get back to the rest of the program. Thank you again so much for coming out on the night of the Midsummer Classic. I'll get back to it. And thank you all for your participation here. Stop sharing and say goodbye. Take care. Thanks. I hope to see you at an upcoming meeting in Colorado Springs. Take care.
So Alter,
Mike, are you going to field questions? Okay.
yeah, I since Owen is actually virtual, although it amazes me in these presentations how little difference there is between virtual and not virtual because it's on the screen. But in terms of discussion, he's not really available, I don't believe, because he's at the All-Star game, which, by the way, is really this year at least really a political statement, because that All-Star game was supposed to be in Georgia, and they pulled it out at the last minute in Major League Baseball, responding to outrage at the voter laws passed in Georgia, and bringing it to Colorado, where we have inclusive voting. So in some ways, I think participating in the All-Star game is a patriotic act this go around. But questions about what Owen presented, and I think there's one question I have, and he mentioned that the citizens initiative can be used to institute some of these reforms in terms of voter funding. I'm not sure this Colorado City charter allows citizen ballot initiatives. Does Stephanie, do you know, or anyone else?
I don't know that we do at a city level, but right. I think he might have been referring to changes to state law that would alter how cities function. But that would also be very difficult for some of our home rule charters, because they won't necessarily be affected by state law if it affects.
Right. I think he actually was referring to, and Owen and I had a little discussion about this in one of the prep sessions, that, a lot of city governments have, citizens can initiate a ballot initiative petition and put it on the ballot. I don't think you can in Colorado Springs, and I could be wrong on that, but fact is, in this community, in this county, I think the city's bad, the county's unbelievably bad, but it's a real swamp, to borrow a phrase from another party, in terms of the way city and the way local government works in El Paso County. So I think we have a lot of work to do. One important thing is the restrictions on contributions, and you saw some of the graphics for the city council race, and it was actually my city council district. Norwood Properties, all those developers, they're pumping money into these candidates, and it's ridiculous, and it's no better certainly at the county commissioner level in this county. So, questions about any of that from anybody?
I think I'm going to sidebar this for a future full night discussion.
Yeah, I think it's, especially as the next round of local elections come up, I think it would be important. I just wanted to close by saying a little bit about voter protection and the role of the El Paso County Democratic Party in doing voter protection in this county. And I've been involved really since the 2012 election cycle in voter protection efforts. And at that point, obviously our state laws were different, and there was much more reliance on in-person voting. Early voting was more limited, and I got involved in as the party does every election cycle, developing with the elections department and the county clerk's office comprehensive, inclusive models for citing polling locations, drop boxes, et cetera. And back in 2012, there was an incredible vote desert that stretched across the whole southeast part of Colorado Springs, and it was just very blatant in terms of where you could vote early, where drop boxes were, those sorts of things. So we worked. I don't know if I want to say exactly with the clerk's office, but we put pressure definitely on the clerk's office to change that map a little bit. And I think over the last number of election cycles, that's really improved. In 2020, we had polling locations at the Citadel Mall, Sand Creek Library, Victory World Outreach, which is on just off South Academy Boulevard, and another really good location at Solid Rock Christian Center, which was a new location in the 2020 election. So, it's important for the party to weigh in on where voting locations should be and how the process should run. The other thing we've done as part of voter protection is obviously every election cycle, we need Democratic poll workers, election judges, and election judges help not only at the polling places, but they help, they collect ballots at drop boxes. They are involved in the count process. And this in 2020, just observing in the count room for close to 2 weeks, I was really impressed with a lot of volunteers. I don't know, is Judy Ingalito still on or not? She was certainly one of them. There were election judges and spent hours and hours and days locked into a count room, which was not the COVID safest place, let me tell you. And they made sure that we had a fair election. So I think that's part of the process. Democrats need to step up so that all those processes are structured by state law, so that there's one of each. It's bipartisan. So when they pick up ballots from the drop locations, there's a Democratic judge and a Republican judge involved in that process. Now, for that, obviously, we need volunteer judges. You actually get paid to be a election judge, not very much, but it is a paid position, and we need to make sure people volunteer in the future to do that. The other thing is election watcher efforts have been very impressive, and they've grown over the years. I think the 2020 election watching effort in El Paso County was something like I haven't seen before. I believe we had 90 some people involved as poll watchers at polling locations. In the observing the count process, et cetera. So it was a real vibrant group of folks and volunteers. And I'm sure some of you were involved in that effort. And it was really important. All that happened with the election in 2020, I think it was very fairly run here in El Paso County. In terms of poll watching, there was only one major incident that I kind of got involved in, and that was out in Manitou Springs, where there's a very overzealous Republican poll watcher, if you want to call her that, who wanted to take down names of voters and make sure she checked the immigration status of each voter, make sure they're citizens, et cetera. And we highlighted that to Chuck Brorman's office, the county clerk's office, elections department. And Chuck himself went out there, and as I understood it, drew put a piece of tape around the area that this election this Republican election poll watcher needed to stay in that area, or she was going to be thrown out of the Manitou City Hall. So it's a fair election process here, but I think it's been the basis for a lot of work and volunteer time for Democrats and people involved with the party. And you can anticipate doing that in the next election cycles too. So, if you want something to do in the next elections, just think about being a poll watcher, think about being an election judge, et cetera. The other thing is, the state law is very specific about how the votes are counted. And there's a bipartisan canvassing board. Lois Fornander was the member representing the El Paso County Dems this go around that oversees the counting process. And then there's what they call risk limited auditing, that after the ballots are counted, they do this audit process that's very detailed, very thorough, and bipartisan with Republican and Democratic representatives, to make sure the counts were correct. It bothered me that Chuck Broerman, the county clerk, decided this year to do another audit that was, I think, cost taxpayers, I believe, it was about $15,000 to audit this process that was very heavily audited and a very fair process to begin with. And I don't know why. This is similar to what they're doing in Arizona with these bizarre audits after the election is long decided. So I think there's things we need that are not working real well in our county, but it's important as the Democratic Party to be aware of all these issues and put some pressure and educate the powers that be about what's a fair and the best election process. So any questions about that? And then I'll talk about a couple of opportunities for you to volunteer to help out help out with El Paso County Dems. Questions? Stephanie, do you have your hand raised?
Well, Mike, it looked like it looked like I'm not muted, am I? Okay. It looked like Gary wanted to talk a bit about ranked choice voting, which is legal in nonpartisan municipal races now, but I don't know that necessarily means that it will happen in Colorado Springs. It's a matter of whether or not people want to do it. Gary, do you want to unmute and talk a bit about what you had in mind there? If he's still on.
I just thought that it would be part of the discussion tonight. That's all. Because I know that some of the council members are for it and there's a couple that aren't. And of course, what I'd like to see is the city turn over its election to the county and let them run it and us get out of the election business. Save money that way, like about anywhere from $300,000 to $500,000 just on a runoff elections. So,
Gary, do you know if they were to do that, would that put these city races on the federal ballot that the county already runs on even numbered years?
I have
on the coordinated elections.
I have no idea at this point because eventually the state's going to get to statewide ranked choice voting for all offices, federal, county, state, everything. I mean, it's going to take time, but eventually we'll get there. But my concern is just getting the city to do it, to make the change. When I've talked to Richard Scorman and Bill Murray, and I understand Yolanda is on board for going to ranked choice voting. Right now, we should move it. And I understand there's going to be a work session in September for a presentation to council on ranked choice voting and switching over to it.
Okay.
So
I mean, think about it. We kind of already do for our at-large seats. They're already, that's how we elect our at-large. You just pick your top, whoever nets the most vote out of that whole pool of candidates becomes our three at-large. So,
right.
Yeah, that's interesting. So Mike, before we go, somebody, I'm trying to remember who it was. Was it Linda somebody who was on in one of the breakout groups wanted to talk, I don't know if she's still here, wanted to talk a bit about what we are envisioning for and how people should comment about it if they end up doing a public comment to the redistricting commissions. So I don't know if anybody has any input about that. The preliminary CD5 has us.
Stephanie, I think you cut out. Who was that had a comment about that?
Karen White, and she is still on. I see here in the comments. We wanted to talk about, she's wanting to talk a bit about how CD5 will be redrawn. And I think maybe how people ought to comment about that and what we should be shooting for as far as how we're redrawn. Because currently, of course, we're like 4.5 counties. We'll go down to a little less than El Paso County, probably, because El Paso County alone has more population than what's allotted for a U.S. House Representative seat right now. So I just will put it out there for everyone's consideration. There is some argument to be made that I have heard that like Colorado Springs and Pueblo should share a congressional district, and most of the rest of El Paso County should be put into neighboring congressional districts, just based on the fact that we are both urban centers along the Front Range with a lot of transportation issues and things that are really specific to that, just very specific needs as far as what we need from our congressional representative, and that it would actually make sense to start splitting up the county rather than trying to preserve the county like it's this sacred unit. I don't know if anybody has any input on that. I know that trying to preserve El Paso County. Opinions? I can't be the only opinionated person on this call.
No, I can speak up. I agree with what you're saying there, Stephanie. I mean, I think, in a lot of ways, people in Colorado Springs, the urban part of Colorado Springs have more in common with folks living in the city of Pueblo than they might in, Monument or far northeastern parts of the county like Calhoun, that sort of thing. So, I think there's some argument to be made there.
Yeah. Taryn, did you have something to weigh in on that? Because I know you wanted to talk about it. So
it's terrible, narrow-minded. I just want to get rid of Doug Lamborn. I mean, I know that's short-sighted, but I didn't know, because right now CD5 has 3 or 4 other small counties. Is
Right.
that correct?
yeah, 3.5 other counties. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I just didn't know if losing those counties is going to skew the numbers worse as far as Republican to Democrat. Now it's just the numbers just never add up. It's just so hard.
Yeah, I think losing Teller and Lake and Park and Chafee, right? I think will enhance the Democratic performance in whatever number district we become, but I don't think it's going to tip the balance. But every little bit helps too, and I think having been involved in these elections the last 12, 14 years here, Democrats have been getting stronger and stronger. Colorado Springs moved more away from Trump between 2016 and 2020 than any other city in the country.
Right.
So, it's not only the boundaries of our district, but I think within the district, within our community, we're, it's a different set of voters. It's not a liberal set of voters. We're not Boulder by any means. I don't know that I'd want us to be Boulder in some ways, but we're getting to the point where we're no longer totally lame. We're in danger of no longer being.
Yeah. The thing too about getting rid of Lamborn, because he's such a like long-serving, comfortable incumbent, and because it's a federal office and it's, you know, and that's at the top of the ballot. If we're really serious about getting rid of Lamborn, we need to flip a county commission district and then another county commission district. We need to pick up another House seat in the state House. We need to pick up another state Senate seat. We need to put Democrats on school boards. We need to put Democrats on city council. All of those down ballot and local races, I think, are like the next thing that has to happen before we can start looking at a strong possibility of getting rid of someone like Lamborn, because the Republican establishment here just has like a well-funded, you know, self-dealing little circle of, you know, they just kind of pass the offices around to each other. They'll always have somebody ready to replace Lamborn, even if something happened to him. They'll always have somebody to run for every office. They don't miss a beat because they're so well established. When we have like a level of establishment that's competitive with that, then we can start like actually setting our sights on flipping that district. And I think it's that building process that has to happen. So,
But I agree with you. We have to have a bench. I mean, you know, Tony and Pete and Mark are great, and Yolanda and others are great office holders, but we don't have